Your parents won a lottery. Most of them still don't know it. They think they were sensible. They think they worked hard, played it safe, made the smart call. And they did work hard. But mostly, they bought a ticket everyone around them said was the boring, responsible choice. They held it for 30 years, and it quietly paid out a fortune. And then they did what any loving parent does with a winning formula. They handed you the numbers. Work hard, be sensible, buy the ticket. It never loses. What nobody told them, and what almost nobody is telling you, is that the draw they won ran exactly once. The machine that made their generation wealthy was switched off years ago. And you are now standing in the queue they told you to join, being asked to pay 8 times your salary for a ticket to a lottery that has already been drawn. The ticket, of course, is a house. And before anyone reaches for the comment button, this is not an episode about whether you should buy one. It's about a story. The story says property always goes up, rent is dead money, and the ladder is how ordinary people get rich in Britain. And the story feels true, because for one generation it was spectacularly true. But here's what actually happened, because it wasn't magic and it wasn't wisdom. Between the 80s and the 2010s, 4 enormous one-off forces fired at the same time. Interest rates fell from around 15% to practically zero, which multiplies what buyers can borrow, which multiplies prices. Banks were unleashed to lend bigger multiples against bigger incomes. Households went from 1 salary to 2, and the market swallowed the second one whole. And high inflation quietly shrank their mortgages in real terms while wages sprinted upwards. Your parents bought at 3 times 1 modest salary, watched the debt melt, and sold into a 40-year flood of cheap money. That's the entire miracle, not bricks, maths. And around the miracle grew an entire national religion. Property shows on every channel. Dinner parties where the house's value gets discussed like a gifted child. A country where the polite question is not what do you do, but have you bought yet? The story stopped being advice a long time ago. It became identity, which is precisely why nobody checks it. And every single one of those forces is spent. Rates cannot fall from 15 to 0 again because they aren't at 15. There is no third salary to add to a household. The engine that drove the whole thing has no fuel left, and the people selling you the story have never once looked under the bonnet. Now the numbers, because the story dissolves on contact with them. In the late 90s, the average home cost roughly 3.5 times the average salary. Today it's more than 8, and worse in the South. Adjusted for inflation, the average British house is worth about what it was in 2007. Nearly 2 decades. Real growth, roughly nothing. Nobody puts that on a property show. Meanwhile, look at what the ticket actually costs now. A £250,000 mortgage at today's rates means paying back getting on for double over the full term. That's roughly 200 grand in interest, which is rent, paid to a bank instead of a landlord, with better PR. Add stamp duty, surveys, solicitors, and the 1% of the house's value that maintenance quietly eats every year, boilers, roofs, the lot. Renters get told their money is dead. Nobody says it about interest, insurance, and scaffolding. And there's a darker mechanic underneath, leverage. A 10% deposit means you're borrowing 10 times your stake. When prices rise, that's rocket fuel. It's why the story worked. When they stall, you're stood still holding the costs. And when they fall, a 10% dip doesn't dent your money, it deletes it. The phrase safe as houses describes one asset, on one street, in one country, bought with 10-to-1 leverage, and your entire life savings as the stake. Say that sentence about any other investment, and you'd be laughed out of the room. And if the ladder still worked the way the story claims, it wouldn't need rescuing. The average first-time buyer is now in their mid-30s. The average deposit is the better part of 60 grand, and the bank of mum and dad has become one of the biggest lenders in the country. Hold on to that one. The proof the lottery paid out once is that the winners are now funding their children's tickets. A ladder you can only reach from the top of someone else's winnings is not a ladder. It's an inheritance with extra steps. So what do you actually do? Not what the comments will claim I said, which is never buy. Buying can be completely rational. Here's the frame that survives the maths. First, buy a home, not a strategy. Buy for stability, for control, for the school run, for the fact that no landlord can bin you off with 2 months' notice. Those are real returns. They're just paid in life, not money. Second, the bank's maximum is not advice. When they offer you 4.5 times your joint income, that is not them assessing what's wise. That's their sales ceiling. The story whispers stretch. It always goes up. The math says every extra pound of leverage is a bet on a rerun of a one-off. Borrow for the life you want, not the most the machine will print. And while we're committing heresy, if you're renting and the sums in your city don't work, renting while investing the difference is not failure. It's just the same trade with honest labels on it. You're buying flexibility and index funds instead of bricks and interest. In plenty of postcodes right now, that trade quietly wins. Third, the house cannot be the whole plan. You cannot eat bricks. The downsizing dream, sell the big place, retire on the difference, collides with everyone else your age having the same idea, and with the small problem that you still need somewhere to live. If the house is your pension, you don't have a pension, you have a bet. Which is why the scoreboard from episode 2, the match from episode 5, the standing order from episode 4, all of it still runs alongside the mortgage, not instead of it. And fourth, if you already own, pause before hurling every spare pound at overpayments. Clearing a 4% mortgage, while leaving free employer pension money and 40% tax relief on the table, is the polite British way of setting £50 notes on fire. Here's the reframe. Your parents weren't lying to you. They were reporting honestly from inside a lucky generation, the way someone who won on their first casino visit sincerely believes they have a system. The betrayal isn't theirs. It belongs to an industry and a political class that took one generation's windfall and marketed it as a law of nature, because an entire economy now depends on you believing it. You don't have to be angry at your mum. Be angry at the brochure. So here's your one job tonight, and it works whether you own, rent, or you're saving. Open the note from episode 2, your net worth, and work out one percentage. How much of it is house or the deposit you're building? If it's under half, the story doesn't own you, carry on. If it's 80, 90, 100%, then everything you have is riding on one asset, on one street, in one drawer of a lottery that already happened. You don't need to sell anything. You just need to know what you're betting. One percentage. See you in the next one.